Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Mandalorian episode review. This one's going to be for episode 8, which is the season 1 finale for The Mandalorian, and I thought this was a fantastic episode both on its own and as the finale for season 1, setting up season 2. I think it did it all here. There was good character stuff, good action, nice references, continuity, and especially a very good cliffhanger ending as well. So it really delivered on all fronts for me. So I was incredibly impressed by what happened here. So yeah, like it did a good job at just kind of resolving a lot of stuff from the season, in that, like, obviously we saw the death of Queel in the last episode, we saw the end of IG-11 in this episode, but most importantly we did get a direction for season 2. Obviously, with the way things end, is once again the Mandalorian going off on his own with the child, leaving Cara Dune and Greef Karga behind, because they obviously have their own kind of path. They're not just part of his crew going forward, but they're still alive, they're still there. There's always the opportunity to come back here. But the path, as explained by the armorer of the Mandalorians, is what he needs to do is that basically they basically say the child is a foundling. You found him, Mandalorian. Din, as we find his name was it Din Djarin or something like that? Din Djarin. I can't remember the exact details, but like his first name is Dyn, so we get his name, so that's helpful. So he found the child, so he, effectively, like, they're in a clan together. He's a foundling. You have to, like, help him, and the way you're going to help him is by bringing him back to his people, so his species. Or they kind of almost imply that, like, if you find some Jedi, maybe give the child to them. So either way, the setup is that we're going to learn about the place where the child belongs, effectively. And realistically, that is probably find the homeworld of whatever species Yoda is. So that's a very cool setup, in that I think it is probably about time to reveal that. I've never understood, like, Star Wars fans who want stuff like that to remain a mystery forever. I get it with stuff like the exact specific details of how the Force works on, like, a crazy super level. I don't mind personally learning a lot of that stuff, but, like, I get why that maybe is something you want to keep secret. But, like, the name of a species, the planet they're from, I don't get why that is something that needs to be kept a secret. So it probably is around time to, commit to telling those stories and revealing us proper information about the species that Yoda is. Given that we've seen Yoda's story play out, and so, it's now about, the child, baby Yoda. So tell us about the details, and it will help to expand the universe. It's something important, impactful that this show has to tell, and I hope it tells us that. So that, I thought, was just a really good reveal in terms of what's going on. The cliffhanger ending, I thought, was fantastic, because it really went from being like, oh, is this going to be the cliffhanger ending? They're just going to reveal that Moff Gideon survived the TIE crash? But then the nature of how he gets out of the wreckage is the big kind of, like, twist. Because the whole time, like, they're zooming in on it, I'm just like, this is not enough for a cliffhanger. Like, this is your end of season cliffhanger, just he survived. But then, the Jawas run away when they hear someone on the way out. A blade pierces through the hull of the TIE fighter, and it's clearly a lightsaber. You see the white glow around the edge of the blade, but then the inner, light basically is black. It's the dark saber. What a reveal. This was a real kind of jaw-dropping, like, reference of, like, I didn't expect this blade to turn up here. Because if you're familiar with the Clone Wars and Rebels, you know kind of where this blade has been, the origin of it, and so it turning up here is kind of like, well, how did that happen? But it sort of makes sense, because there's only really one jump to make, and I'll get into that, explaining it in a second. But the reaction to this episode it's obviously very telling, in that anyone's reaction to that at the end, you can immediately tell if they're familiar with the Clone Wars or Rebels or not. Because if they've never seen a black lightsaber before, they haven't seen those shows, and if they know exactly what it is, you know that they've seen it. So that's a cool thing, and it makes sense. Dave Filoni's animated shows, Clone Wars and Rebels, covered this lightsaber very heavily. Jon Favreau, who's of course the showrunner on The Mandalorian, he voiced the character where this lightsaber was introduced, Pre Vizsla, who is a Mandalorian. The leader of Clan Vizsla, and so on, leader of Death Watch, which again is referenced in this episode, in that the flashback, which we get the full one of Din the Mandalorian, he is ultimately saved from the droids by the Death Watch, it seems like, arriving, Clan Vizsla, because you see the symbol on their arms. And it makes sense because they are the only warrior, basically, group of Mandalorians around at that point in the Clone Wars, because the show, The Clone Wars, got across the idea that Mandalore is more of a kind of pacifist, it's a neutral system, it's a pacifist people as we meet it across the Clone Wars. So the only real warriors they have as such, especially Mandalorians like that in the armor, are the Death Watch. So that was a cool thing to see, like that's who he was saved by. Great reference. But yes, let's get into explaining some of the stuff about the Darksaber. So we are told about the history of this blade over the course of the Clone Wars and Rebels, and we also just track what characters are in possession of it as it goes along. So the sort of ancient history of it is that it is more of an ancient weapon. It is the lightsaber that was made by the first ever Mandalorian Jedi. It was then taken back from the Jedi by the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian versus Jedi War, which is referenced in this episode as well. It's kind of an old Republic conflict, so really cool that they're making a lot of that stuff canon. And from there on out in Mandalorian sort of culture, it is a weapon that just sort of belongs to the head of the Vizsla clan going forward, which is where we get introduced to Pre Vizsla in the Clone Wars as the current head of Clan Vizsla. He revealed when he confronts Obi-Wan Kenobi that he has this black lightsaber, the Darksaber, and they have a duel. So Pre Vizsla holds on to this weapon up until towards the end of the Clone Wars, when Darth Maul, as part of like one of his second or third plans, basically decides to create sort of a criminal empire, teams up with the Death Watch, who want to take control of Mandalore and bring it back to its warrior ways, basically. Maul double crosses Pre Vizsla, challenges him to one-on-one combat for the leadership of the Death Watch. He kills Pre Vizsla, so Maul gains control of the Darksaber and has it all the way up until Maul's appearances in Rebels. And obviously with what happens there, Sabine ends up taking the weapon back. She ends up training with Kanan with that blade, which is where we learn some of the other stuff about it. And then towards the end of Rebels, Sabine gives it to Bo-Katan, who is Satine's sister. So Duchess Satine from the Clone Wars, her sister is Bo-Katan. Sabine gives it to Satine's sister, Bo. And as we're entering Season 7 of the Clone Wars, which is coming in February, where one of the arcs is going to be the Big Siege of Mandalore, I'm pretty sure that's meant to be the finale of the overall series. So we're likely going to see this weapon again. Bo won't have it in Season 7 of the Clone Wars. Maul should still have it at that point. So we're going to see him hold on to it. I don't think it will change hands or anything like that, but I think we will see it in some of the stuff that we're expecting to happen. So, Season 7 of Clone Wars is going to be interesting in how it links into stuff. There's still some details we don't really know about, but obviously we're getting so close with where the Clone Wars is getting to Episode 3. It's really cool. But anyway, so the last we saw of it technically in canon was that Bo-Katan had it as the Empire came in and took over the Mandalorians, Mandalore. And she should still have it up until, as far as we're aware. What we don't know about is obviously when it was taken from Bo-Katan by Moff Gideon. Thankfully, in this episode, it is explained to us that Moff Gideon was like basically working on Mandalore as part of the IBS. What is that? Or ISB? Is it Imperial Security Bureau or Imperial Bureau of Security? I'm not sure. Either way, he was there on Mandalore. This is how he knows like the full names of like the Mandalorian's full name. He knows everyone. That's sort of the position that he has of like an intelligence agent type thing. And clearly, somewhere along the line, he ended up in possession of the Darksaber, taking it from Bo-Katan, who Obviously, we don't know when she dies or whatever. She could be still alive, actually, who knows? In that, like, some people have already speculated, like, could Bo-Katan actually be the armorer? That would be a very cool reference of just, like, the episode where this female Mandalorian stands out the most is the episode where the Darksaber is introduced here. Like, there's some connections that they could make in that, you know, she survives. That character survives this episode. You think she's going to do this sacrifice of just stay in her home, the place that she was the leader of, and just die taking out as many Imperials as possible. But she survives. She takes them all out. She's still there. And she's wiser than everyone else. The only thing that counters that, of course, is that Bo-Katan... It probably directly counters it, so I don't think it is Bo-Katan. Is that Bo directly met Obi-Wan Kenobi. So she knows what a Jedi is, and she wouldn't be talking about them as like a legendary order of sorcerers when she directly knows Obi-Wan. So that was just a connection that I didn't fully think through. But still, there's some fun connections that they could have, and that Bo-Katan could still be out there somewhere. It does make you still wonder again, though, who is the armorer? If it's even important who she is, given the whole Mandalorian thing of don't take off your helmet in this era. But either way, the setup for this obviously is that they're making a big deal about this weapon, an Imperial officer who has a lightsaber that is important to the history of Mandalore, a Mandalorian lightsaber. And given that the show's called The Mandalorian and our character here, Din, you know, it feels like at some point he has to take possession of this lightsaber. Maybe not. Maybe he doesn't hold on to it for particularly long, but like it seems sort of fitting that he at some point would use the Darksaber. Other than that, like why is it being introduced, and what is it leading towards? Because they're making a big deal about the fact that like no one really knows the details about the Jedi or what a lightsaber is. So it's going to be a crazy thing, like when he sees that blade for the first time and what it means, and that, you know, it's the lightsaber that's ultimately meant to belong to, like, you know, a Mandalorian Jedi or the leader of one of the clans. And if things are as bad as they are for the Mandalorians, then, like, I guess the leader of this new clan here of two, the Mandalorian and the child, he has some rights to it, basically, given that the Mandalorians at this point aren't, like, as it said in this episode, they're not a race, it's just a creed that you follow at this point, given what happened, given the Purge and so on. So, that's something I'm very interested about, in that clearly Gideon and the Mandalorian are going to fight at some point. We're going to see this blade used in combat. What counter to it does the Mandalorian have? He obviously has Beskar armor, which I think is just lightsaber like resistant rather than being lightsaber like immune. So that is not like an obvious counter, in that like if Gideon like delivers a good enough strike, I suppose he will be able to cut through the Beskar, but the Beskar is at least some protection against that sort of a thing. But still, Mandalorian doesn't have a weapon to counter the lightsaber, so what are we going to see over the course of this episode, the show going forward? Either way, big reveal, and just the how impressive it is that some of the clearest kind of canon stuff of, like, you know, okay, you have the movies, you have your live action TV shows, you have the animated TV shows, finally making some connection between all of that stuff, and it works. It's a big reveal, it's a cool weapon, and I'm so excited to see how it's used going forward in terms of whatever legacy they tried to create with it. What else do we get here? I suppose I'll briefly talk about the whole clan of one, a little bit more on the direction of the series going forward. Just the fact that the armorer does basically say to Din that, like, you know, the child is a foundling. Like, you have to act as its father up until you can bring it back to its people. Like, you basically, you know, when it comes of age, you know, train it type thing. And, you know, I don't think anyone expected, like, the armorer to forge a Mandalorian helmet for Baby Yoda or anything like that. But, like, it's oddly fitting that by the end of the episode, Baby Yoda is wearing the sort of necklace with the sort of Mandalorian symbol on it, that they are that close. They are part of the same clan now, effectively. So yeah, that was very good to see, and just yeah, the big thing in all of this, she gives him as like the final upgrade here, the jetpack. Finally, the entire look is complete with this edition. He has his jetpack, and what do they call it? The Rising Phoenix, I think, which is interesting that they call a lot of these kind of items that they add onto their armor like these kind of very. It's not just a jetpack; it's a Rising Phoenix as part of their culture. So, he explains that he was trained on it when he was younger, and that once he's healed, he'll be able to use it. And we see it in use at the end of the episode as basically the way that he defeats Moff Gideon's TIE fighter. Flies up into the air, grappling hooks onto the TIE fighter, and then uses some charges, explosive charges, to blow off one of the wings, and that's how he wins the day, basically. As for the rest of the episode, I think the highlight probably beyond that stuff is definitely how good of a job they did with IG-11 as a character over the course of this one. Very, very impressive, of like this character who was basically gone in like the first episode. We never really thought we'd see him again. Comes back in the last episode. Okay, cool. And in here, the journey they take that character on is so well done. Using the fact that it's a droid, using the kind of change of programming, it now has different goals. It's now a nurse droid, so its goal is now to protect the child. And the idea ultimately is just that the programming doesn't take away the fact that it's still got all these skills as an assassin droid. It's just how it chooses to use those skills. That instead of going out to hunt people and have a little bit more freedom of who it targets, it now will use those skills to protect whatever it's looking after. And I thought that was really well done, like, situation throughout this. So IG-11 being the one to sort of save Baby Yoda from those scout troopers was a great reveal, in that the last episode did lead you to believe that, like, oh, is IG-11 just kind of like a pacifist at this point? Is he basically just C-3PO, like a kind of protocol droid now? That all of the lethal aspects of it are gone. But no, it is just a change in approach rather than a full change, in that by the end of the episode we find out that still most of its sort of manufacturer required kind of programs are still there, in that the whole it can never be captured is always a thing with the IG droids, that the manufacturer will not allow them to be captured, so the explosive thing still counts. And how by the end of the episode they link that in with the idea of protecting Baby Yoda by, the only way it can fulfill both of those criteria, not allowing itself to be captured and protecting Baby Yoda, is to blow itself up and kill the stormtroopers blocking their way. That was very well done. Plus, it links into the story of the Mandalorian when we finally get his backstory of just what happened. The fact that basically, I suppose the idea is his parents were killed by droids. His life was turned upside down by the droid army of the Separatists coming in and ruining his world. And he was saved by the Mandalorians, and because of that, he becomes a foundling. That was really well done, and so it helps to explain that, like, there's no super specific thing about why he doesn't like droids beyond just that they in his mind kind of ruined his life. He accepts that they're sort of a part of the world, but he doesn't like to particularly be too close to them. But then you also have, like, back to the first episode, he didn't want IG-11 to blow up there either. He didn't want him to have to sacrifice himself, and was trying as hard as he could basically to save him from that. But ultimately he kills it in the end to protect the child. Here, again, we have him showing that connection, that Din ultimately acknowledges this, like, what IG-11 has done to protect the child, and doesn't want him to sacrifice himself here, and is arguing with him about, like, no, your programming should say that you shouldn't sacrifice yourself because you still have to protect the child, but ultimately it is true. The only way to get out of this is this sacrifice. And just that little moment of, like, there's no need to be sad. I'm not sad. No, I know you're sad because of my altered programming to be more of a nurse kind of droid, I understand, I can analyze like emotions better. So he knows from the tone of his voice that he is a bit upset about this. And it's a big moment. Like, it was so cool to see IG-11 just step off that boat into the lava, walk up the remainder of the river, come out on the other side next to all the stormtroopers, and just explode as they watch on from further up the tunnel, and then have to come out, and that's when the big Moff Gideon action happens. Very, very cool. I suppose going back towards the start of the episode, I really like the setup as they brought in the turret, the cannon that they had to set up. Very, very cool of just like Cara knowing exactly what that weapon is and how they need to get out of here now, because that thing is just going to rip their cover apart. And then when he starts speaking to them, it was such a great moment for the character, because like, I don't know how much you really got into Moff Gideon just based off the last episode, but here you got to see more of him. The intelligence, he's more of a thoughtful character, he'll think before acting, and just the fact that he leads with the idea of like, okay, there's no need to go storming in or anything like that, we have them kind of covered. I'll speak to them and I'll shock them, get them on guard by telling them that I know exactly who they are, revealing the full name and past of all of these characters to them. He knows who Cara Dune is, he knows her full name, he knows who the name of the Mandalorian, even though he's seemingly this sort of nobody just in Mandalorian armor. He knows his name. Very important. He knows who Greef Karga is. He knows his past as a, what was it, he said, he gave him some sort of a title, I can't remember exactly what it is, but either way, as some sort of a leadership title, the failed leader of this place. And so it was just like, okay, cool. Like, he has them on edge by like knowing their history that the characters don't want him to know about. And then he basically says like, oh, your rebel friend in there should know exactly what this weapon is, because enough of her allies have been killed by it that she knows exactly what it's capable of. That was a great line to just get across, that like, I know the effect I'm having on them in there, that we have them cornered, and I'm doubling down on that by sort of manipulating them, playing with their minds and all of this. Ultimately, you know, this is when the firefight happens, and when IG-11 comes in. I really like the idea of like the Mandalorian tries to do the thing he did in the first episode by just taking control of the turret and turning the tide, and he was doing that, except Moff Gideon is there. And I like that he just walks through the blaster fire, you know, stepping out of the way, but like being fairly composed in all of this, right up to the Mandalorian, and it's just like, okay, what's he doing here? He's got the turret, okay, power supply, that's what I'm going to do. Takes out his gun, one shot, takes out the weapon that's causing them so much trouble. Huge explosion, really badly injures the Mandalorian. One shot, one action, and he just has turned kind of the tide of battle. That was, I thought, really well done. And it led to, I think, one of the best moments of the episode, which was us finally getting to see the Mandalorian's face. In that, what I liked about it was actually that it was kind of such a non-event of a moment, and that like, cool, we get to see his face, but then it's like, okay, we've just seen his face. We know what the actor looks like, so like, what was the reveal? Because they set up that like, oh, is this when it's finally going to happen? Cara wants to administer some first aid, but she needs to take off his helmet because most of the damage is to his head, is like a concussion and stuff like that. But he refuses to let her. And then IG-11 comes in and is just like, okay, I'm going to heal you, but I need to take it off. He's left alone with the Mandalorian, and so you have that discussion of like, I can't take it off in front of any living thing. I'm not a living thing, so he ultimately accepts it. And it's a very fitting moment because it's the Mandalorian being saved by a droid, countering, you know, his like hatred of droids in a way, his dislike of them, that one of them has just saved him here. And I liked it. Like he had like what, one line of dialogue with his helmet off, and stuff like that. The idea of just that joke of like, your central processing unit has been damaged. You mean my brain? Yes. It was to put you at ease. It was a joke. I thought that was a very fun line of dialogue. But yeah, it was just like, okay, we've seen his face now. Great. But there's still the plot point in the series left of, it is only meaningful when he takes it off. and shows it to another living thing. In that, like, he hasn't even shown it to, like, Baby Yoda, Kara, any of these other characters. So who is going to be the first character he takes it off in front of? And what will cause him to do that? What will change within his character that he would be willing to do that and finally sort of in a way accept going against the creed of the Mandalorian? That is the big character point. And I like that. I like that they were able to do it here, of just basically get across what is the kind of obvious mystery of just what does his face look like, but also keep this big character point about it. We know what he looks like, but all the other characters don't. So when they see his face, that's going to be the big moment. We just know what it is. So when it happens, our focus will be on the character moment rather than just what his face is. The reaction will be more on the other characters' faces in a way than his, because ultimately there's nothing about his face that is a reveal necessarily. So I thought that was very kind of, in a way, cleverly done, well written, of just like kind of taking some of that reveal away, but also, you know, keeping some of it in play in a pretty nice way. And yeah, I just overall thought it was a wonderful episode in that, like, it brings this first season to an end, sets up the next season really well done, but also did some great stuff with the characters of, like, you kind of get Moff Gideon that little bit more, because there's the intrigue about, like, what did he do? How did he come into possession of the Darksaber? Like, that's a big thing. And the fact that he has history on Mandalore immediately links him in closer to the Mandalorian. And the whole IG-11 thing was just a fantastic end for that character. The fact that they end with, like, Cara Dune and Greef Karga with their own kind of plans of, like, Greef Karga is going to start up the Bounty Hunter Guild again. Cara is actually going to stay there and kind of be his enforcer. There's maybe a hint that she might do some bounties somewhere down the road, but like that, she and Greef are there. They're allies with the Mandalorian, and he can come back to them when he needs them, I suppose, is the idea. And I like that, because there's the tease that, like, obviously Mandalorian is left now. Moff Gideon is still on the planet. So without the Mandalorian, will they be able to stand up if he, like, calls reinforcements? Or will he give up on this planet at this point, knowing that the Mandalorian is left? There's a lot of questions, but, like, where to next? Where does the Mandalorian go to get a clue about where Baby Yoda is from? And obviously the questions would naturally be, he's probably going to have to come into contact with a Force user. He might have to find a Jedi, and that sort of a thing. And there's a lot of options of, like, where they could go, in that this is where I'm, like, really thinking they could do some big stuff of, like, is this potentially where they link in a lot of these ideas of, like, where Star Wars Rebels ended, of, like, Thrawn is still out there, we know Ezra is still out there somewhere, Sabine and Ahsoka are going after them wherever they went to. Like, that's a path to get them, you know, somewhere. I don't necessarily know if this is the show to do that, but that would be a huge thing if it was able to do it. I think it's just the fact that this was finally an episode of The Mandalorian that really heavily linked into, like, Dave Filoni's previous projects, The Clone Wars and Rebels. It made me feel that they might be willing to do it that little bit more. Like, the fact that we had Ahsoka as one of the voices in The Rise of Skywalker, like, they're trying to make these connections more and more. And, like, Ahsoka is such a fan favorite character, like, it would be a great use, basically, to have it kind of come back in that way. And it would almost be very fitting to almost, like, return the Darksaber to Sabine somehow. That would be interesting. Again, though, you'd have to cast someone that looks somewhat like the animation of Sabine and stuff like that. Would a live action Ahsoka actually work? Those type of things. Who do you get as, like, live action Ezra? It's very up in the air. And then, like, you just have all this stuff of, like, how many other Force users are still out there? Are there many other Jedi who survived the Order 66 still alive at this point in time? Stuff like that is the questions that you have. Because otherwise, like, where does he go to? In that, like, he has to find someone wise enough to know this stuff. And the immediate place I go to is perhaps, like, Kashyyyk and the Wookiees. They are old enough that they might remember Yoda, a member of that species, and might have some connection maybe with the Yoda species, and might know where they come from. That's one path to take, for sure. But beyond that, you don't really know. Like, who does he get into contact with about, like, unknown species that no one seems to know about? The fact that it's as much of a mystery in universe as out of universe, it's like, how does he find his way there? And it's like, you know, if Baby Yoda could commune with Yoda somehow through the Force, like, that's an obvious way to do it. But even then, it's kind of like, does Yoda come? Do we know Yoda for sure is, like, from his home planet, or like those type of kind of questions of, like, you know, does that species have a home planet anymore? Did something happen to it? Is it just a group of them out there somewhere? And loads of questions. And I think that's what's impressive about this. It felt satisfying, but you're desperate to see what happens in season 2. So, yeah, they're my thoughts on The Mandalorian episode 8, the end of season 1. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.